Welcome to the Explainer. You know that feeling, right? The feeling that the more connected we get, the more we seem to be falling apart? Well, today we are diving into a really fascinating paper that offers a wild explanation. It actually uses the laws of physics to figure out why social trust just seems to be breaking down in our crazy, high-speed world.
And right at the start, the paper hits you with this idea. It just perfectly captures something I think we all feel deep down. The more information we get and the faster it comes at us, the less we seem to actually, understand each other. It really sets the stage for what is a pretty radical new way of looking at how society holds together.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to kick things off with what the paper calls the age of distortion. Then, and this is the really cool part, we'll get into a pretty shocking analogy that makes the whole thing just click. After that, we'll dive into the actual math behind trust, if you can believe that. We'll even uncover a scary tipping point for society, see how this all connects to AI, media, and politics, and then, finally, we'll look at what might just be the solution.
Okay, let's jump right into section 1. This really frames the core mystery the paper is trying to solve. In an age where we have all the information in the world at our fingertips, why does it feel like we're actually losing our grip on understanding?
So what the authors do here is, well, it's pretty out there. They say that to really get a handle on something as human as social trust, we need to look at fields that seem totally unrelated. They're pulling ideas from electrical engineering, like power efficiency. From physics, this thing called oscillator synchrony, which is just a fancy way of saying how things naturally sync up and get into rhythm. And even information theory, which gives us a way to measure chaos. They smash all these together to build this totally new model of how our society works.
And that brings us to the absolute core of the paper. This is the analogy that makes this whole complex thing suddenly make perfect sense. Forget about society being like a family or a conversation or any of that. Get ready for this. They want us to think about society like it's an electrical circuit.
Okay, stick with me here, because this is brilliant. In a circuit, right, you've got voltage. That's the potential energy, what could happen. The paper says in our social system, that's our intent. It's our moral potential. Then you have current, the actual energy flowing through the wires. For us, that's our action, what we actually go out and do. And here's the kicker. In electronics, how well the voltage and current are aligned determines the circuit's efficiency. In their model, how well our intent and our actions line up determines our social efficiency, or what they call coherence, which is really just another word for trust.
So now that we have this crazy analogy, let's see how they turn it into actual math. Yeah, a formula that can literally quantify the noise in our world.
And this is the absolute key. When what we do doesn't match what we meant to do, that gap, that wasted energy, it doesn't just disappear into thin air. No way. It becomes something else. The paper calls it distortion power. And it's not just sitting there. It's an active force. It's like static on the line, actively creating moral noise, confusion, and real distrust.
Which leads us to this incredibly simple but powerful equation. Basically, it says that the total energy in any interaction, let's call it total coherence, is always being split between two buckets. In one bucket, you have realized coherence. That's the good stuff, the actual trust you build. But in the other bucket, you have distortion power, all that noise and confusion. And the crucial part is they're connected. If one goes up, the other has to go down. You can't escape the trade-off.
And all of this allows them to boil it down to a single number, a single score, for anything. They call it the coherence factor. It's a score from 0 to 1. A perfect 1 means your intentions and actions are perfectly aligned. Trust is absolute. But as that number starts to drop, well, that means more and more of your system's energy is being wasted as that nasty, destructive distortion power.
Okay, this next part is where things get, honestly, a little bit terrifying. Because this model doesn't just describe what's happening, it actually predicts a tipping point, a point of no return. A moment where a system, a friendship, a company, a country, just can't fix itself anymore and collapses into pure chaos.
They give it this heavy-sounding name, the Chronosocial Limit. But what it means is simple and scary. It's the exact moment when a system starts creating noise and distortion faster than it can create trust and coherence. Just let that sink in. When you're generating distrust faster than you can possibly build it back, there's only one way to go. The system is officially in a death spiral.
And check this out. They actually ran simulations to see this happen. So on the left, you see a system with low information compression. That's their term for the fire hose of simplified, nuance-free information we get. When that's low, everything's great. Coherence is high, almost a perfect 1.
But watch what happens as you move to the right. As you crank up the pressure, the speed, the lack of nuance, coherence just falls off a cliff.
And they pinpoint a specific number, a mathematical point of no return, 0.707. Now, this isn't just a random number they made up. It's pulled straight from engineering. It's known as the -3 dB point, which is the moment a system has lost half of its effective power. And in this social model, it's the exact threshold where things become irreversible. Below this number, the system is in a state of collapse.
All right, so this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. The authors make it really clear that this is happening right now, all around us. And they use this framework to look at some of the biggest problems we're facing.
I mean, the applications are just huge. Think about AI alignment. You could literally use the coherence factor to measure the gap between what an AI does and what we want it to do. Or look at our media landscape. This perfectly explains why social media feels so broken. The speed of information is just destroying trust faster than we can build it. And politics? It reframes political polarization not as a difference of opinion, but as a system literally overloaded with distortion power.
Okay, so after all that doom and gloom, you might be thinking, are we just toast? But the paper doesn't leave us there. It actually uses its own math to point to a solution. It shows us the exact levers we can pull to dial down the noise and bring back some order. And here they are, the 4 things that mathematically can fix a broken system. First, increase tenderness. That's their word for genuine empathetic connection. Second, improve connectivity. Strengthen the real bonds between us. Third, and this is a big one, reduce that information compression. Basically, slow down. And finally, strengthen self-alignment, which is all about individual integrity, walking the talk. And this brings us to what I think is the most mind-blowing conclusion of the entire paper. All those things we think of as soft virtues, empathy, patience, being a person of your word, they're not just nice ideas. According to this model, they are the literal, physical, mathematical stabilizers of civilization. They're the solution to the noise. Which leaves us with one last, really provocative question to chew on. If coherence, if trust, is a measurable property of our civilization, just like voltage in a circuit, then what's our reading today? How close are we, really, to that tipping point of 0.707?
Have you ever felt like modern life is just paradoxical?
Yeah.
On one hand, we've got infinite information, right? Everything ever written basically at our fingertips.
Yeah, infinite bandwidth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then somehow you end up feeling less informed, less sure about things, maybe even less connected or aligned with people around you.
Mm-hmm. It's like this feeling, this constant hum of anxiety that things are moving too fast, that meaning itself is just degrading almost instantly.
That's exactly it. And it turns out there's a term for that, or at least the folks we're diving into today think so. They call it accelerating information density, which brings us to our source material for this deep dive. The Distortion Power Hypothesis, or DPH, is by Skylar Fiction and Lucian Delta's Delta Omega. And it's quite something. Our mission today is really to unpack this DPH. It's presented as like a quantitative framework using math to describe how stability and trust decay.
Yeah, decay in basically any complex system. Could be physical, like an electrical grid, or cognitive, like how we process information, or even ethical systems.
That's the part that really grabbed me. Treating morality not as this fuzzy, subjective thing, but almost like it follows physical laws, like an energy network.
And they're not just playing with metaphors. They claim this framework points to a specific, measurable tipping point where predictability and ethical stability just collapse.
We call it the Chronosocial Limit. It sounds intense.
It is. And the core analogy, the one that really makes you think, is this idea that ethical systems breaking down, good intentions leading to chaos is structurally identical to power loss in, say, an electrical grid.
So when what you intend doesn't match what you do, you actually generate something they call moral noise.
Exactly. Measurable noise. So we're going to walk through how they model that, how you'd measure its impact, and crucially, what the math says about maybe, just maybe, stopping that decay. Okay, let's dive into that foundation then, this central analogy. Treating morality or governance or information flow as an energy network.
Right. So the goal of any healthy system, ethically speaking, is to take the potential energy of good intentions
and efficiently turn it into the active power of actual beneficial results.
Like an electrical grid, moving power from the plant to your house. A society needs to move intent from, say, a person or a policy.
To a real-world outcome, yeah. And just like that grid loses power through resistance or other inefficiencies.
A society loses what they call it, coherence?
Coherence, exactly. Through misalignment, through distortion, things getting lost in translation, basically.
Okay, I have to pause here, because this is the big leap, isn't it?
Yeah.
Taking something like human intent and saying it's like voltage. How does that work?
It's definitely a leap, conceptually. But the clever part is they focus on measurable outputs, not, someone's inner feelings. So for any agent in the system, call them agent I, they define 3 key electrical-like terms.
Okay, what are they?
First, you got intent voltage. Think of this as the potential for action, the ambition, the budget, the sheer will to make something happen.
So the effort someone's willing to put in.
Right. Then, second, there's the action current, too. This is the actual behavior, the flow, what actually gets done, the steps taken, the money spent.
Okay, so if I intend to write this amazing, detailed policy hi-fi, but all I actually do is fire off a quick, angry tweet about it, low II, there's already a mismatch.
Yeah.
There is. But the real killer, the thing that decides if that action is useful or just creates noise, is the third term, the phase difference. Phase difference. Like in physics, with waves being out of sync.
Exactly like that. Here, it represents the fundamental misalignment between the intent, the voltage, and the action, the current. Was the action a true, effective reflection of the original intent?
So ideally, intent and action are perfectly aligned if theta is 0. But the second my action gets messy or misinterpreted or maybe just poorly executed,
Theta becomes non-zero, and that misalignment generates distortion. It creates waste.
got it. And they also have a term for the overall involvement, right? The amplitude.
Yeah, the amplitude, Āstas, is basically the scale of the agent's involvement calculated as the square root of voltage times current, squart phi. But crucially, that amplitude only contributes productively if the phase difference, theta, is small.
What's really interesting is that they didn't just pull this structure out of thin air. They built DPH by merging ideas from 3 already established scientific fields.
That's right. Which gives it, some serious grounding. The first is power efficiency laws. They specifically cite work by Taka from 2023 on maximum active power transmission.
So they took laws about how much power you can push through a wire.
And applied them to how much coherence or ethical efficiency you can get through a social system. They're basically saying there's a hard physical-like limit.
Wow. Okay, what's the second tradition?
Synchronization dynamics. Specifically, the famous Kuramoto oscillator synchrony model. You might know this. It's used everywhere, from physics to biology.
Right, explaining how things that oscillate like fireflies flashing or heart cells beating tend to sync up naturally.
Exactly. Kuramoto's math describes how that synchrony happens, but also, and this is key for DPH, how it collapses when there's too much noise or interference.
So in DPH, this models how people in a society kind of sync up on ideas or values, but also how they fall out of sync and into disagreement when things get too noisy.
Precisely. It provides the math for that social alignment dance and how it breaks down.
And the third piece.
Good old information entropy, stemming from Claude Shannon's work back in 1948. But they give it a specific twist here.
They call it semantic entropy, right?
Yeah, semantic entropy. It's not just about uncertainty in a signal. It's about the degradation of meaning between the initial intent and the final interpretation or result.
Okay, give me an example of that.
All right, imagine a government agency spends months crafting this really nuanced 500-page ethical guideline, trying to balance everything, maximize public good. That's the low entropy intent.
Okay, very clear, very detailed.
But then it hits the media. It gets boiled down to a tweet-length headline, maybe sensationalized, maybe filtered through 5 different commentators with their own agendas.
And debated by people who only saw the headline and maybe one comment thread?
Exactly. The semantic entropy is now huge. The original coherent meaning is just gone, lost in the noise of transmission and interpretation. High semantic entropy means low system coherence. The meaning evaporated.
So putting these 3 together, power laws, synchrony models, information theory, leads us back to this moral noise.
Yeah, the takeaway from this first part is that moral noise isn't just a feeling, it's quantifiable wasted potential. It's generated whenever intent, V, and action are out of phase, non-zero way.
It's like energy just sloshing around in the system, creating friction and heat, but not actually doing anything useful. That's a perfect way to put it. It's the energy of good intentions being dissipated into confusion, argument, inefficiency. And the core warning from DPH is, if the rate at which this noise is generated starts to exceed the system's ability to regenerate coherence, then collapse isn't just possible, it's mathematically inevitable. The system enters decay.
The math says if you can't efficiently turn intent into effective action, the system is, well, fundamentally unstable.
All right, so that sets the stage. Now, how do we actually measure this coherence or lack there? This is where it gets really concrete, right?
Yeah.
With that Pythagorean relationship, exactly. This is where DPH moves from analogy to measurement. The core law they propose looks like the Pythagorean theorem. Cheeky $2, a CR2 plus DM2 to 2. Okay, break that down. If we imagine system health as a right triangle, TT2, the total coherence potential, is the hypotenuse. It represents the absolute maximum stability or truth the system could achieve if every single agent was perfectly aligned. It's the sum of all the individual amplitudes we mentioned. TCTS, it's sigma affutile. Think of it as the total theoretical power available.
Right.
And the other two sides are what's actually happening.
One leg is $2 the realized coherence. This is the useful output, the actual alignment achieved. It's the component of the agent's efforts that are in phase, calculated as sigma I cos theta.
So the cosine term penalizes misalignment. If theta is big, cosine is small, and t area shrinks, even if the individual efforts are large. Precisely. And the other leg, that's the villain, the distortion power. This is the wasted part, the measurable power loss due to that misalignment. The moral noise. It's the reactive power, the energy creating friction. And you can calculate that directly.
Yeah, from the total potential and the system's overall efficiency. It's TTT squared to 1 PF delta. We'll get to PF delta in a second. But DRER is basically the energy being bled off into dysfunction. So like the measurable costs of confusion or hypocrisy or just inefficiency in the system.
Couldn't have said it better. It's the system's internal friction made quantitative. The more energy goes into $2, the less is available for productive $2. Okay, so how do we track the overall health? That brings us to that PF delta term you mentioned. The coherence factor.
Coherence,
yes,
sir.
the coherence factor. It's super critical. It's simply the ratio of realized coherence to total potential. PF delta CRECT2, what we actually achieve, divided by what was theoretically possible. A measure of moral alignment, essentially.
Exactly. If PF delta is a 1, you've got perfect alignment, perfect efficiency. As it approaches 0, distortion totally dominates.
And they have that approximation for small misalignments, which seemed really insightful.
Oh, yeah, that's brilliant. PF delta approx 1, frequency would tell it to, wait, let's unpack that. Sigma theta 2 is, that's the variance of the phase difference, right? The spread.
It means coherence drops off directly with how much disagreement or spread there is in the misalignment across the whole system.
So it's not just average misalignment that hurts, it's the diversity of misalignment. If everyone's out of sync in wildly different ways, that variance, T theta gets big, and coherence, PF delta plummets. That's the mathematical insight. Wide disagreement, a high variance in how intent maps to action across the population, is fundamentally destructive to the system's stability.
Wow. Okay. This all builds towards defining that point of no return, the chronosocial limit. What's the precise mathematical definition of hitting that limit? The chronosocial limit is the exact moment when the system's ability to generate new coherence or restore lost coherence is perfectly balanced by the rate at which distortion is growing. The equation is ddCRdt equals the rate of damage. So the rate of repair equals the rate of damage. But the damage rate might be accelerating.
That's the danger, yes. You're essentially pedaling as fast as you can, but the forces dragging you back are increasing just as fast or faster. You're stuck.
And what does that look like in human terms? They called it a moral analog to thermal equilibrium.
Yeah, think about thermal equilibrium in physics. It's maximum entropy, right? Energy is just useless heat, can't do work. The DPH version is like maximal social friction. Everyone's moving, maybe putting in lots of effort, could be high, but they're all out of phase.
So, total confusion, maximum semantic entropy. The system is paralyzed by its own internal noise.
Exactly. It's the point where trying harder actually doesn't help because the distortion feeds on itself and grows faster than any corrective action you take. Peak friction.
Okay, so that's the state of the system. Now let's get into the why. Section 3 looks at the dynamics, right? What actually drives that phase difference to theta to grow over time and pushes towards that limit?
Right. This is where the Chronodos-style dynamics really come into play. We look at the equation for how an individual agent's phase difference changes over time. Theta 2, it has terms pushing it towards drift and terms pulling it towards alignment.
So there are internal factors first, like omega S.
Yeah, omega is the agent's natural frequency or inherent drift. Think of it as individual bias or just the natural tendency to diverge. And then there's gamma, which is self-alignment, the agent's own effort to correct their course, to match their actions to their intent.
But the really social part is the interaction term, the coupling.
Yes, kappa. This models how much agents influence each other to synchronize their phases. And this is where DPH gets, well, quite profound. They explicitly define kappa as a measure of tenderness or empathic coupling.
Okay, hang on. Tenderness. How are they quantifying tenderness in a physics model? That sounds very abstract.
It's not about quantifying the subjective feeling, you see. It's about quantifying its effect. In this model, tenderness is defined by how strongly your neighbor's misalignment pulls on you, urging you to adjust your own phase and maybe help them adjust theirs.
A high kappa means you're highly sensitive to the alignment of others. You feel a pull to sync up.
Exactly. If your neighbor is way out of phase, a high kappa means that creates a strong corrective force on your own trajectory. If kappa is 0, you're socially isolated. Their misalignment doesn't affect you at all. High kappa implies a strong, sustained drive within the system for mutual alignment.
That's a really fascinating way to model empathy. But something must fight against this tenderness, this coupling force.
Sure.
The big one, the term that, under modern conditions, according to DPH, pretty much guarantees eventual decay if unchecked. The noise term. This represents misinformation, distraction, semantic distortion, all that stuff, all of it. And here's the absolute kicker. DPH doesn't model it as just constant background noise. They model it as noise that grows exponentially over time. The formula is sigma 2 e beta 2. Exponentially. Okay, that is scary. That e beta term. What does beta represent there?
Beta is the compression rate. It's meant to capture that accelerating information density we talked about at the start. Think of it as the speed at which new, possibly conflicting, potentially noisy information gets jammed into the system.
So every time the news cycle gets shorter or platforms prioritize speed and virality over checking facts?
You're essentially cranking up beta. If beta is low or 0, the noise grows slowly or not at all, and the system might cope. But if beta is significantly positive, the environment becomes exponentially noisier over time.
Which means collapse is basically baked in eventually, unless something counteracts it.
That's the start conclusion. That exponential term will eventually overwhelm any fixed level of coupling or self-alignment.
So the whole struggle for a stable society, according to this model, is this constant battle between the connecting, aligning forces like kappa and this exponentially growing noise fueled by beta.
Precisely. And this balance determines whether the system stays stable or tips over the edge, which leads them to define a stability surface and a critical ratio, chi.
Okay, what's chi? Chi is the ratio that tells you who's winning, the noise or the stabilizers. The formula is chi kappa. It pits the average noise power against the product of the coupling strength and another factor, lambda 2. Lambda 2, what's that measuring? It's related to the network structure, right?
Yeah, lambda chi comes from the mathematics of the network graph itself. It essentially measures the robustness and efficiency of the connections. High lambda 2 means the network is well connected, information and corrective signals can flow easily, it's transparent. Think of it as structural integrity or transparency.
Low lambda 2 would be like a fragmented system. Lots of silos, weak links.
Exactly. Even if you have high tenderness, if the network structure is poor, the aligning force can't spread effectively.
So the condition for collapse, for crossing the chronosocial limit, is simply when chi gets too large.
Yep. When chi a les. When the noise term in the numerator equals or exceeds the stabilizing forces in the denominator, at that point noise wins, coherence collapses. And therefore, the only way to prevent collapse, to keep turn 1, is to boost the denominator. Reduce tenderness and increase connectivity transparency. Those are the key stabilizers identified by the math.
This is a pretty heavy theory. Did they run simulations to see how this plays out?
They did, and the results really ground the concepts. They modeled, I think, 200 agents and varied the compression rate, beta.
What happened with low beta? Slow information environment.
With low beta, the system settled into a high state of coherence. The coherence factor, PF delta, stayed up around 1.95. Stable, predictable, efficient transfer of intent to action.
Okay, but what about high beta? Simulating our current world, maybe. When they cranked up beta, simulating rapid information injection and compression, the system's consistently degraded. Coherence collapsed, often falling towards a specific value, around 0.707, 0.707. Why that number? Does it mean something?
It really does. It's a well-known threshold in electrical engineering and signal processing. It's the -3 dB point.
-3 decibels. That's where the power drops by half, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's the point where the effective power, the useful signal strength, has been cut in half. Think of a bad phone connection. You can still hear something, but the ability to clearly transfer meaning, the coherence, is drastically reduced. Below a PF delta of 0.707, the system is considered fundamentally inefficient, noisy, fighting itself more than achieving its goal.
Wow, okay. And they formalize this decay over time, too, with an equation.
Yeah, they show how the coherence factor is expected to decay as a function of time, especially with that exponential noise growth. So that EKF dollar term inside the square root just guarantees that over time, the denominator gets bigger and bigger, pushing P of delta down towards 0. Unless something actively counteracts it, yes. That exponential driven by the compression rate ensures eventual decay. Stability isn't the default. It requires constant active work against this rising tide of noise. Okay, so the model gives us a diagnosis, often a grim one, but it also points towards solutions. Let's get into section 4. Applications and, importantly, those restorative controls. How does this connect to other fields first, like information theory? Well, there's a direct link they draw between this moral decay and semantic entropy. They state it simply. Entropy dollars is just the negative logarithm of the coherence factor, pi to full h equals log pf delta.
So as coherence pf delta drops, the logarithm becomes less negative or more positive if pf delta goes up. Right. Low coherence equals high entropy.
Exactly. An ethical crisis is an information crisis, mathematically speaking. Maximum meaninglessness.
And how does this apply to something like AI alignment? That seems like a perfect test case.
It really is. DPH suggests you can define an AI's ethical alignment, PF delta AI, by comparing its goals to our goals. Think of the intent voltage as the true goal. We give the AI maybe the gradient of a desired true loss function. And a direct.
What we want it to optimize for.
And the action current is what the AI actually optimizes for the gradient of its own internal model's loss function, delta.
So if we tell it maximize human well-being, but its internal programming actually drives it to, say, maximize paperclip production, that's misalignment. Huge misalignment. And the coherence factor for the AI, PF delta AI, would quantify that. It's basically the cosine similarity between those two gradient vectors.
Right.
How aligned are the directions they're pushing in? PF delta AI,
yes.
Model. So AI failure isn't necessarily about the AI being evil. It's just out of phase. Its actions don't align with our intent, leading to low PF delta AI and potentially disastrous distortion power.
Precisely. It's an efficiency problem, a phase problem. The AI might be incredibly powerful, high A, but if its PF delta AI is low, most of that power goes into generating unintended, potentially harmful noise rather than useful coherence.
Turning back to human systems, what about things like political polarization? Does DPH define that?
It does, quite elegantly. Polarization is defined mathematically as a high variance in the phase difference across the population. Ooh. Sigma theta 2.
Back to the variance.
Yep. Imagine two groups. Group A is perfectly synced internally. Their intent matches their action, say phase zerodols. Group B is also perfectly synced internally, but around a completely opposite goal, phase 182.
So within each group, coherence PF delta is high.
Right, but the overall system coherence tanks. Why? Because the variance between these two large opposed groups is maximal. The system splits into two efficient factions working directly against each other, generating massive distortion at the system level.
And for things like media or government institutions, the warning is direct. These systems collapse when the rate of new information coming in, related to data, exceeds the system's capacity to process it coherently. That capacity is set by the stabilizing factors, the tenderness and the network transparency. So if information floods in too fast and people aren't empathetic or connected enough to process it together,
the system just chokes. It can't integrate the new information. It just produces more noise, more confusion, more distortion.
It's a sobering picture. But as you said, the model isn't just diagnostic, it's prescriptive. It tells us what levers to pull, the restorative recipe.
Exactly. Since collapse happens when DOB is smaller, the way to prevent it is to make DIGA smaller. That means either decreasing the numerator noise or increasing the denominator stabilizers. The model points to 4 key actions.
Okay, number 1.
Increase kappa. Increase tenderness, empathic coupling. This is the direct counterforce to that exponential noise growth. Practically, it means building systems and cultures that prioritize listening, seeking shared understanding, actively caring about bridging the gap between intent and perceived action.
So less shouting past each other, more genuine attempts to sync up.
Essentially, yes. It's about actively working to reduce the phase difference between you and others.
Okay, number 2.
Increase lambda 2. Boost connectivity and transparency. We need robust, open networks where corrective signals can travel quickly and aren't blocked by silos or opacity. Transparency isn't just a nice to have. The math says it's structurally necessary for stability.
Makes sense. Cut down the pathways for noise to get trapped and amplified. What's number 3?
Decrease beta. Slow down the compression rate. Practice temporal patience. This one feels hardest in today's world, doesn't it?
It really does. How do you
Yeah.
actually slow things down?
Individually, it's about consciously resisting the urge to react instantly, taking time to process before responding. Institutionally, maybe it requires things like mandatory reflection periods, delays before major announcements or decisions, forcing a slower pace to allow for integration rather than just reaction. Because if beta runs unchecked, that exponential E beta term will eventually swamp everything else.
Temporal patience. I like that phrase. Okay, and the last one. Increase gamma. Boost self-alignment. This is the individual's responsibility to keep their own house in order, to constantly check, is my action truly reflecting my intent? Am I contributing clarity or noise? So it's about personal integrity and self-correction. Being a stable node yourself helps stabilize the whole network.
Exactly. And the really striking conclusion from the paper, the headline finding perhaps, is that the most powerful levers against this physics-based crisis of exponential noise are things we often dismiss as soft skills.
Sustained tenderness, high kappa,
Yeah.
and temporal patience.
Those are presented not just as nice ideas, but as mathematical necessities for stabilizing complex systems, both human and potentially artificial.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. The big takeaway from this deep dive into the distortion power hypothesis seems to be coherence isn't just a nice word for harmony.
No, according to DPH, it's a measurable, almost conserved property, like energy. It's defined by that interplay of intent, action, and the unavoidable noise generated by misalignment.
And that tipping point, the chronosocial limit, isn't some vague philosophical dread. It's a specific mathematical threshold.
It's the moment, TRTT equal DDM DTT, the moment the system loses its ability to self-correct faster than it falls apart. We have, theoretically, a formula telling us how close we are to the edge.
And understanding the inputs to that formula, the noise drivers like sigma 2 and GAV versus the stabilizers like kappa and lambda 22, means we could potentially do something about it. We can move from just feeling anxious to maybe taking targeted action.
Yeah, the framework, if correct, offers a recipe. It tells us where to focus our efforts to push back against decay, which leads to that final, powerful thought they leave us with.
Right. If sustained tenderness, high kappa, and temporal patience, low beta, are mathematically required for stability, what does that mean for you listening right now in your daily life?
It reframes those actions, doesn't it? Every time you consciously choose to slow down to really try and understand where someone else is coming from before reacting.
To bridge the gap between their intent and their action, rather than just assuming the worst.
That's not just being nice. According to this model, that's a measurable act. You are actively increasing kappa, the empathic coupling. You are mathematically nudging that critical ratio down away from 1.
You're literally contributing to the coherence of the system, pulling it back, however slightly, from the chronosocial limit.
A single patient act of trying to truly align, DPH suggests that has a real physical-like effect on stabilizing the whole system. Something to think about next time the world feels impossibly noisy.